Michelle and I would like to offer this webinar today in recognition of National Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month. And we're pleased to offer the webinar Programming for Clientele with Developmental Disabilities. The content we'll be covering today is based on a professional development series that we have developed in order to promote a better understanding of developmental disabilities, how they impact learning and behavior, as well as to provide some suggestions to assist in providing inclusion when you're conducting educational programs in accordance with disabilities laws. We'll be sharing some highlights of the series with you during the session, and we have both full half-day trainings as well as online courses available if you're interested in more information, and we'll talk a little bit about those later. We'd like to start off with a poll to find out a little bit about each of you. So Mark, if you'll put up the poll, please.
Okay, I've launched that poll, folks. Go ahead and respond there. We'll just take about 10 seconds. Okay, just another 5 seconds. Okay, and Jeanette, I'm going to share these. Let me know if you can see those results.
I can. So it looks like we have about 5 people that work with 4-H Youth Development and 5 that work within Cooperative Extension, Family and Community Health Sciences. And we welcome the person on our seminar today that's not affiliated with Cooperative Extension, and we hope that you find this seminar valuable. Thank you, Mark. So our Programming for Clientele with Developmental Disabilities training series includes the 5 modules that you see on your screen. The series provides an opportunity for both formal and non-formal educators, volunteers, and staff to better understand different types of developmental disabilities and to learn how to plan, adapt, implement effective programs for audiences which may include individuals that have developmental disabilities. A review of the literature finds that although many educators view inclusive programming as favorable, they report a number of barriers to successfully implementing inclusive programming. Inclusive programming is offered in accessible settings and gives all learners the services and accommodations they need. Many educators indicate that their most pressing need is professional development about disabilities, followed by inclusive educational strategies. And we'll be talking about some of those today. So the series objectives, they include, number 1, participants will expand their knowledge of common developmental disabilities. Secondly, develop an understanding of the relationships between developmental disabilities and learning styles. Third, develop an understanding of the different types of problematic behaviors and their common triggers and learning techniques for preventing and managing problematic behavior. Fourthly, participants will develop an understanding of visual learning styles and how visual supports help individuals to be more successful in the learning environment. And finally, participants will develop an understanding of what resources are available to accommodate clientele with developmental disabilities. Our next poll will focus on your knowledge and experiences related to developmental disabilities. Mark, will you put that poll up?
Sorry about that, a little slow on the draw. So I've launched that poll, folks. Go ahead and give us your response there. We'll just take about 10 seconds. Just another 5 seconds. All right, I'm going to end that and then sharing the results.
So looking at the results, About 75% of you have provided educational programs to individuals with developmental disabilities. 31% have took formal classes or been involved in professional development training, and a little over half of you have a friend or family member. Thank you so much for sharing. So we wanted to start with a little intro activity. And using your chat box, I would like you to think about what does the term developmental disability mean to you? And in your chat box, if you would list 2 to 3 words or a phrase or two that describe or define the meaning of the term developmental disability. So take a few minutes to do that. And why don't we say a minute? So thank you to those that have responded and those that are still putting some responses in. So some of the definitions that we have are learning at a different place or level, learning in a different way, different from the standard, takes a bit longer than average to learn something, thinking outside the box, communication difficulties, learns differently than others or at a different pace than others. And we will be talking a little bit about that during our seminar today. Some limitations, challenges, instructional flexibility. Wonderful responses. Thank you so much. So I want to start off with a more formal definition of developmental disabilities. Developmental disabilities are a group of conditions due to an impairment in physical, learning, language, or behavior areas. A developmental disability is a permanent cognitive and/or physical impairment which occurs before the age of 22 and usually substantially limits the individual in one or more major life activities. Some of these major life activities include, but are not limited to, caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, communicating, thinking, learning, reading, as well as seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, lifting, bending, breathing, concentrating, and working. So we'd like to find out what you know about some of the statistics related to developmental disabilities. So we have one more poll for you to respond to, if you will, please. Mark? So according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, how many individuals in the U.S. have developmental disabilities? Your responses choices are 1 million, 5 million, 6 million, or 10 million.
Okay, I've launched that poll and results are coming in, although we do not have unanimous agreement. So let's see. Here we go. Okay, so as you can see, the majority of you indicated over 5 million. And then about 6 of you, 30%, indicated over 10 million. Well, let's see what the results are. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, over 6 million individuals in the U.S. have developmental disabilities. And
About 1 in 6 children between the ages of 3 and 17 in the U.S. have one or more developmental disabilities or developmental delays, which usually last throughout a person's lifetime. So next we'd like to move into some descriptions of developmental disabilities. Both learning disabilities and attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder are neurological disorders. Learning disabilities result in difficulty with processing, communication, sequencing, and motor skills. Attention deficit disorder, also known as ADD, is characterized by distractibility, forgetfulness, inability to concentrate, poor attention span, and impulsiveness. Attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity disorder, has the same characteristics as ADD, but also includes hyperactivity. Autism spectrum disorder, also known as ASD, is a group of developmental disabilities that can cause significant social, communication, behavioral, and learning challenges. It is called a spectrum disorder because the symptoms range from very mild to severe. Almost half of those diagnosed with ASD have average to above average intellectual ability. Intellectual ability, or ID, is a term used when a person's IQ creates limitations in mental functioning and in the daily living skills needed to live, learn, work, and socialize. These skills include communication, self-care, leisure, health and safety, and self-direction. Sensory processing disorder, or SPD, is a complex group of neurobiological disorders involving a person's ability to process and respond to sensory input, such as touch, smell, taste, sound, or sight. The person can either be over-responsive, under-responsive, or sensory-seeking. At least 1 in 20 young children have a sensory processing disorder. The number is even greater in children with autism, ADHD, and learning disabilities. Tourette's syndrome, or TS, is also a neurological disorder characterized by tics. The tics are involuntary, rapid, sudden movements or vocalizations that occur repeatedly in the same way. So now we'd like to talk a little bit about learning styles. Individuals with and without disabilities have preferred learning styles, as I'm sure most of you know. There are 3 main learning styles: auditory, kinesthetic, and visual. Auditory learners learn better by listening. Kinesthetic learners learn best through hands-on activities that involve movement and manipulation. Visual learners learn better by watching rather than just listening. They also tend to remember details better that they can see. So, what is your preferred learning style? If you'll take the poll.
Okay, I've launched that poll. Okay, just another 5 seconds. Okay, looks like my preferred learning style is a winner.
Great, kinesthetic. What are we not surprised? And I think the point, this was just a little bit of fun to get us thinking about learning styles, but the important point is that last bullet on the screen. Though most individuals utilize a blend of all 3, visual learning predominates in our poll today, but most importantly, it predominates with those with developmental disabilities. And using this information, we're going to now move on to a review of some of the most universally accepted instructional techniques to best meet the needs of individuals with developmental disabilities. Michelle?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. So the following techniques that we will be sharing on the next few slides are valuable when working with any learner, but particularly effective when teaching individuals with developmental disabilities. So, number one, as we mentioned before, because individuals with developmental disabilities tend to be visual learners, if verbal directions are difficult for the learner to understand and process, we encourage you to use visual supports around the room, especially when it comes to explaining what is going to happen next, such as a sequencing activity or a transitional activity. And visual supports can be things such as pictures, videos, photos, drawings, schedules, timers, written instructions, any of the above. And this will make following directions much easier, will make for more effective learning and a more engaged learner, and will also help prevent any problematic behavior. Secondly, we recommend that you break tasks down into small, manageable steps. Pace your lessons according to the activities and needs and abilities of the group, and build in as much routine, structure, and predictability as possible. Those are really key. Going on to the next slide, here are a few more instructional techniques. We all need directions stated in a very clear and concise manner. And for learners with developmental disabilities, it's extremely important to use one-step, not multi-step directions, meaning give one step at a time for the task or activity. Plan your activities that encourage opportunities to practice a new concept repetitively, a new skill or a new concept. And that's because it's often difficult for people with disabilities to generalize their new skills into the real world and outside of that educational setting. So we encourage you to have opportunities to repeat and use the skill in the educational setting, and then, if possible, use that new skill or concept in the so-called real world or community. And that will help foster generalization of the learned skill. To enhance learners who are kinesthetic, like many of you, we want you to include hands-on activities and use modeling or demonstrating the tasks or even each step of the activity that you are asking your learners to do. Next slide, we have a couple more techniques for you. Vary your instructional time between passive and active movement techniques, and also include movement breaks. The research shows that movement can be an effective cognitive strategy that strengthens learning, improves memory and retrieval of information, and enhances the learner's motivation and morale. Next, individuals with disabilities are very, very positively impacted by rewards, such as verbal praise, a high five, or reinforcers of some kind of special motivator. You can use a simple token reward system, like putting pennies in a jar to work toward a certain goal. Offering an age-appropriate acknowledgement. For instance, with youth, you might want to offer a sticker. For older youth or adults, a certificate of some kind as they work toward their goal. Rewards need to be offered frequently to acknowledge even small positive actions. And the material value of the reward is not what is important. It's the acknowledgement. Okay, so next we have an interactive activity for you. We'd like to give you the opportunity to use these instructional techniques and descriptions of the disabilities that we've just gone through and try to apply them to some scenarios that we've created for you. So we'll look at the first one, and hopefully if we have time we'll look at the second. And what we would like you to do is using the chat box, if you don't have a microphone, Or if you do have a microphone and you can keep it turned on, Mark can make you a presenter. And you can share your thoughts about how you would react to this scenario, what techniques you might employ in such a scenario. So I will read it to you and then give you a few minutes, again, building on the points that we've learned so far in the webinar, as well as your own personal experiences with this population. Identify the techniques that you would use to engage these individuals in the learning activity. So here's the scenario. You've been asked to present a lunch and learn workshop at a community worksite for adults with developmental disabilities. Some of the participants have very basic reading skills and others have short attention span. So we'll give you a minute to think about that and maybe type in or let Mark know if you'd like to speak orally and let us know how you would, what techniques you might employ for this scenario.
Yeah, folks, we'd love to have you chat. If you just let me know, I can promote you to panelist. We can turn your video off if you don't want that on, if you do have a camera, but just, again, just let me know in chat and I can turn that on for you. Yeah, I'll give someone to ask about the PowerPoint being available. If Jeannette and Michelle, if you're okay with that, I'll convert it to a PDF and then I'll make it available on the Learn site.
Thank you.
And if we could also say that this PowerPoint is part of an online course that's going to be launched shortly through Colorado Online Learning.
So I see some suggestions here. Use short activities, hands-on activities with music. Use visual supports, break down tasks one step at a time, take frequent motion breaks, great. Use of a short video and maybe a short activity, and use hands-on tools. Those are great. Anyone else want to jump in with any other suggestions? Photos and large word posters, demos of tasks. Okay. Use of a timer to keep on task. Good. Puppets, fun, good. Picture recipe cards, absolutely. Music. Photos, graphics in a large format of whatever the topic at stations where each participant can do a hands-on activity to learn. These are great. You all sound like very experienced educators. Wonderful. Let's try another one. Okay, scenario 2, same instructions. This time you've been asked to collaborate on a gardening project at a school serving students with developmental disabilities. These students have various social and sensory challenges. Okay, I see use of herbs. Break down the steps. Student to instructor ratio should be as small as possible, right? Any other ideas? If possible, meet with partner site ahead of time to find and assess needs. Pair strong social students with the ones who need more help. And limit sensory overload. Excellent. Okay, we'll read one more. If you want people to practice planting, have tubs available with dirt and clean planting, like use of tub of dried beans. Good. We see a lot of awareness here of sensory issues, and very nice workarounds. I like these. Make sure the area is accessible for all, absolutely. Be sure to have tactile, scent, winding paths. Good, we've got some gardeners out there, I think. Okay.
And remember, if you're working with students that have autism, their ability to do multiple steps sometimes is very limited, especially their severity of autism. So do be aware of that. Many times they can only do one action.
Okay, great. Okay, so now we'll move on to the topic of behavior. I want you to understand that behavior is communication. I can't stress this enough, particularly for students who have language delays or language difficulties, and all behaviors, even those negative, problematic, maladaptive, whatever we want to call them, they are all serving a purpose. And usually those problematic behaviors arise because the individual is trying very hard to cope with an experience that can be extremely challenging, confusing, disorienting, possibly frustrating or frightening. So as you see on the next slide, we want to make sure that everyone understands not to take any of these maladaptive behaviors personally. Behaviors can be categorized into 3 different types. First one we call attention seeking, which is pretty self-explanatory. And some of those these behaviors rather can be negative behaviors for attention. Recommend ignoring those and acknowledging the positive behavior. Behavior may also occur because the individual is trying to avoid the work, possibly out of frustration, or they may need an escape from the environment, kind of tied up with sensory, maybe some sensory overload. Or the behavior itself might be sensory. It might feel good in some way to the learner. It might sound good, feel good, taste good, even look good. So as you get to know your program participants better, you'll be able to identify what type of message this problematic behavior is trying to send you, what it's all about, what type it is, and you may be able to even prevent it from occurring. So again, it's important not to take these behaviors personally. They're not a reflection of your teaching, but they are generally an inherent function of the disability or disorder itself. So what are the common triggers of negative behavior? Like we said, individuals with developmental disabilities behave in particular ways for a reason. They could be having trouble transitioning from one activity to another and may need to be prepared in some way for moving on, a warning, a timer, a list of steps that they'll be taking. They may have difficulty understanding the directions, especially if they're multi-step directions. We talked about giving one-step directions. This may lead to frustration, falling behind. They may feel out of control if there is a lack of structure in the environment. Downtime is difficult for these individuals to handle, so we recommend you keeping them engaged in an activity as much as possible, while also being aware of too much and sensory overload, kind of finding that fine line. And as I said, being aware of sensory overload, and this can occur when the person's senses become overstimulated by things in the environment. It could be noise, it could be lights, it could be tactile sensations, any number of things. Okay, so now we're going to talk about program accommodations and modifications. These terms are often used interchangeably, but technically they do have different meanings. So the term accommodation may be used to describe an alteration of the environment, the curriculum format, or the equipment that you are using in your task. And these accommodations will allow the learner to gain access to the content and complete the assigned tasks. Program accommodations allow learners with disabilities to participate in that educational venue or activity. And what we're doing here with accommodations is altering the method by which the educational experience is being offered. However, we're not modifying the content. That will fall under the definition of modifications. So here are some examples of an accommodation. You could have a sign language interpreter. You could give extended time to complete an activity, provide large print text, or have assistance from another individual, a peer, a volunteer, or an aide. Sometimes computer systems offer like text-to-speech systems for someone who might need that if they are, for instance, visually impaired. Trackballs or alternative keyboards can sometimes be used for, again, people who might have some fine motor limitations. And the next slide, you'll see the difference what we mean by modifications. So modifications do actually modify the content, okay, not the method. So in modifications, we're making some kind of change in the curriculum or the content to make it easier for the learner to participate and feel successful. So we're helping them to comprehend all of the content, but maybe in a slightly modified way, with less expectation possibly, like reduce the number of tasks, put something at a lower reading level than you are giving the general group if it's an inclusive group. Reduce, like I said, the number of steps required, or even provide an alternative assignment that is more easily achievable. You might have to modify the program requirements. For example, if you're working in a 4-H animal project, for example, the person with disabilities may be allowed to receive assistance from a peer or another individual in taking care of the animal, so it wouldn't be on that person's shoulders alone. Okay, next slide. We also have to make sure that when there are individuals with disabilities in our programs, that they are physically able to participate in the environment, like one of our participants said about the garden. Make sure that there are winding paths. And for instance, in a garden, make sure those paths are wide enough so that, for instance, someone in a wheelchair can navigate the space. It's important to check to see if your organization has some type of Office of Disability Services that they can provide you with some ideas for accommodations, or maybe there's already a plan in place for this particular student. We need to be sure to provide equipment that accommodates those physical needs. And like I said, that can be clear pathways for people in wheelchairs. In a garden, it might be a raised bed or use of container gardens rather than in-ground gardens. If you're doing something, for instance, like a cooking program, for those of you in Family and Consumer Sciences, raising the heights of seating or tables, or color coding your kitchen utensils with matching color code in a recipe. Even be aware of needed adapted lighting or other types of equipment to accommodate their physical needs. Okay. And finally, we want to bring up how we speak with and how we show respect to all participants in our programs, and we're calling this choosing words with dignity. We previously provided you with the definition of developmental disability, and we said that it was a functional limitation that interferes with a person's ability to do things as walk or learn or talk. The term handicap is not an acceptable term when describing an individual with a disability. The term handicap is something that is really describing a situation or a barrier that is in the environment, but it doesn't describe an individual. So if you're ever uncertain about what language or terms to use when we're speaking with a person with a developmental disability, ask the person and find out how that person likes to be addressed or what terms that person prefers. Remember that choice and independence is very, very important, and we want to let the person do as much as he or she can by himself or herself, speak for him or herself, and try not to give excessive praise. Sometimes by doing this, we evoke this we use words that evoke a sense of pity. And that is really not showing full respect for the person with the developmental disability. The next slide describes something called person-first language, and some of you may be familiar with this. So we know that each of us is made up of many, many characteristics, many, many abilities, and few of us want to be identified by just one of those abilities. So all of these characteristics make up who we are. People with disabilities, just like everyone else, have many characteristics and one or maybe more disability. So to avoid labeling people based on their disability, we use something called person-first language. And person-first language is an act of not describing a person by his or her disability. We talk about the individual first and then the disability. For example, instead of saying the special needs child, that puts the disability first and then the individual. It's putting a label on that child, and it's describing what the person has and not what the person is. And when we define someone by their diagnosis or the disability, again, we're being disrespectful to their individuality. So here are some examples of what a person first versus a non-person first phrase would be. Person first would say, Kate has autism versus Kate is autistic. It might say, LaToya has a learning disability instead of LaToya is learning disabled. Jose has an intellectual disability versus Jose is mentally retarded. Mentally retarded is an outdated definition or label, should I say, for someone with intellectual disability. We now call it intellectual disability. Another example, Stephen receives special education services, not Steve is in special ed. So I hope that everyone can appreciate those differences. Okay, and finally, we would like you to know that training and resources are available for extension professionals, volunteers, and other educators through these three formats. We do offer in-person training. They can be scheduled by contacting us, either full-day or half-day sessions. We are also, as Jeannette mentioned earlier, in the process of partnering with Colorado State University, and all of our modules will be offered shortly online in a series of sessions. You can take them individually, or we highly recommend you take all 5 modules and earn digital badges as you go, and finally a mastery badge if you complete all 5. And then very shortly we have 5 fact sheets that accompany these 5 modules that will be on our New Jersey Agricultural Experimentation website, and we will provide those URLs as soon as they are up. The Office of Communications at Rutgers is currently in the process of posting those. Our contact information will come up on the next slide. If you'd like further information, please don't hesitate to reach out to us either by phone or by email. As you can see, I'm in the what we call Family and Community Health Sciences Department here at Rutgers. Jeannette is the state 4-H agent. And we hope that this information was valuable and will aid you in better serving your clientele with disabilities. We thank you very much for participating. And at this time, we'd like to open up the floor to questions.
Okay, folks, as Michelle said, yeah, any questions, you can put those in either Q&A and chat. We're watching both of those. Cynthia says, will there be a cost for the online modules? And Jeannette responded with yes. Any follow-up on how much?
Jeannette, are you going to type it or are you going to speak?
No, I don't have those numbers in front of me, so.
Is there a link?
There is a link. We're waiting for a link from Colorado State.
Okay.
We would be happy to share it with all the participants as soon as we have that available. Again, they're still in development, but we will share it as soon as everything is available.
Okay.
And I just want to point out, we have,
Priced.
I'm sorry.
They're reasonably priced, approximately $60 per course, depending on what grouping of courses you take.
Right, and also if you have a group of people at your site or extension office or department, there will be a group discount as well. So there'll be different pricing structures, and we hope that they're reasonable.
Novella says, is there a particular age level that this material is targeted?
No, it's really targeted to all age levels. With developmental disabilities, as we spoke about in the definition, they become evident before age 22, but they really are lifelong. So the principles will apply and the strategies will apply. Of course, we would encourage you to choose age-appropriate content and reinforcers and motivators, but the techniques apply to both youth and adults.
And if you were asking with regard to the training, we have done some of this training with teens that assist with programming, teen counselors, camp counselors, things like that. So the training is applicable to both youth, teenagers, as well as adults.
All right, folks, we'll hang around for another minute or so for questions. I'll put a link. Most of you, I assume, probably got here via this Learn link, but I've added the presentation. I've created a PowerPoint. If you scroll down on this Learn link toward the bottom, there's a link under Event Materials. Presentation is the title. If you click on that, you can download the PDF. Also, the recording will be available at the Learn link here within a few days. I'll be sharing that, and then we'll need to get it uploaded to YouTube. So we'll just hang around for another 30 seconds or so. Last chance for questions.
And we will be sending a follow-up evaluation just to get some feedback on what was helpful to you in this webinar.
Okay. All right, doesn't look like there's any other questions at this time. So Michelle and Jeannette, any closing thoughts?
We want to just say thank you very much for your participation. We hope that you found this to be helpful.
All righty, thanks, folks. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much.
Sure. Bye-bye.